Brilliant. Welcome, everyone. This is the Digitech Leaders series. My name is Paul. I'm the founder at Skyland Search. There's a hot topic right now with regards to sales enablement, with lots of companies that are growing, the impact of COVID. Some companies are cutting back, some aren't. So I'm really super happy to have Sheridan on the call with us today. Sheridan's got a background in enablement. So, welcome on the show, Sheridan. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you very much for having me.
So we've just discovered that I'm based here in Barcelona and I'm at 28 degrees. And how hot is it there where you are?
So I'm in Reading at the moment and it's currently 32. So I'm winning on the temperature scale.
You're
so
winning.
Far.
Okay. So yeah, we was just discussing off air with regards to the fact that we've got air conditioning. So I'm quite cool at the moment. And Sheridan, you've just got a desktop fan. So
I have.
So with regards to sales enablement, thanks for coming on. I really wanted just to kind of discuss certain things. And one of the things is kind of bring it back to the beginning, because lots of the people that watch this video, they're definitely leaders in software companies. And obviously everyone's trying to grow. So everyone's at different stages. Some are scale-up startups and huge enterprise companies. So let's break it down and really just invite you to kind of give us an overview of, what is sales enablement, in the general sense of the term.
Yeah, of course. So I think there are lots of definitions of what sales enablement is. But if I was to boil it right back to kind of the essence of what it means to me, it's making sure that the sales teams, regardless of kind of their route to market, but all of the sales teams within that company have the correct content, tools, training, and everything that they need in their toolkit, if you like, to be as effective and as productive as they can possibly be. So it's kind of arming them, building them with the armor they need to go out there and get the sale.
So in terms of, I suppose, the reason exists, because we can look at, like, some companies have it, some don't. In your opinion, why does it exist? What's the purpose, the true purpose of it? And perhaps what does it look like if you don't have it? What's the difference?
Yeah, of course. So if I answer the first part around why does it exist, and again, I think it's a really interesting question, because at the moment I would say it's seen as sometimes a nice to have rather than a need to have. Yeah. For me, obviously, as an enablement person, it's definitely a need to have. It's a must, an absolute must. But for me, it exists because it's being that voice of sales for all of the various business units across the whole company. So it's almost being that orchestrator between the different parts of the company, building those connections, breaking those silos, and really making sure that everything that's being created or done or discussed is putting that salesperson in the middle of that conversation, and making sure that it doesn't become too almost ivory towered and kind of third, fourth hand thinking, and that it really is in the root of that person that's going out there to sell that product or that proposition.
Right. Okay. So then what happens, because I've experienced it when I've spoken to leaders and they might be a head of sales and they kind of, I do, they almost take it on themselves. I do that anyway. We don't need enablement. And I'm like, okay. So in your opinion, what does it, if a company hasn't got it and it's being displayed, what happens in your experience or in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think without it, it becomes more of kind of a tactical piece rather than a strategic piece. It's almost plaster sticking, firefighting, and dealing with the problems as they come and being reactive to the situation. So it's not proactively stepping back and taking time to get to know the sales force, understanding common themes, common challenges, and then making sure as a business that you are enabling them to be as effective as possible based on those challenges. Now, yes, that may be done disparately by various people kind of wearing different hats across the business, but having that sole person dedicated to it, that is what their objective is, that's what they're driving to do. So it then becomes more of a strategic approach, and you can then embed that into kind of business objectives and strategy and make sure that that's integrated as a red thread throughout the business entirety, rather than just kind of that reactive kind of problem solving situation.
Yeah, and let's be clear, enablement, sales enablement, it would cover anything from, anything commercial, so marketing, customer success,
Definitely, yeah.
sales engineering, even professional services across the board, right? It's not just that traditional direct sales or partner sales led type team you'd look after.
No, not at all. And I think it's really important to point that out, actually. And it's also things around kind of like the service engineers and like say, the customer success, because it's every single touch point that a prospect or a customer can have across their whole buying journey, not just kind of that initial piece.
Yeah.
And obviously, as we know, prospect and customer interactions and the way in which they're interacting with companies is dramatically changing now. So I think even more so, it's highlighted the importance for enablement to connect those dots and make sure that there is a consistent story across the board, and that it isn't kind of being taken as new, and then that story trying to be articulated at each stage again.
So if you think about, I mean, we've touched upon some advantages, but if you was to round that up and think, okay, so the biggest advantages, because there might be people that are listening to this thinking, actually, you're right, we kind of expect our VP of sales or a VP of success or a VP of marketing to kind of just take parts of this. And they might be thinking, actually, let's strategically move forward with enablement. What are the overall advantages in your mind of what it provides a business?
So I think for me, it's almost having that fresh perspective at all times. So it's not someone that's embedded, if you like, into the day-to-day selling as some of the other roles that may wear that hat would be. So it's someone that's able to step back and assess the situation and provide guidance and feedback based on what they're seeing as kind of third party looking in.
Yeah.
I think also you become almost a trusted advisor to those various teams, whether all of the different types of teams we've been talking about. So it's also nice for that person to be separate to the day-to-day sales manager, for example, so that there is a different relationship that you can build and reach out and say, hey, Sheridan, I'm really struggling with this. What do you think? I know I should probably, this is something I should know. And I've been doing it for 2-3 years now, but just to get a different perspective that someone outside of kind of your day-to-day remit is also a really big advantage, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, if we look at companies, we alluded to it earlier, the different growth. Is it a myth? It might be a myth that, you have to get to a certain size before perhaps you actually bring in enablement. When, in your opinion, when do you think is the best time to bring in somebody that's actually going to have that sales enablement function?
Yeah, so again, I think you're correct. It is almost a myth that you have to be established to a certain point before enablement's brought in as kind of that executor of the business strategy or whatever it is. But I think from my, obviously I'm going to say this, but I think it needs to come as early as possible. So that person in that role is there from the beginning. They are embedded in the decisions that are made. They're at the root of those decisions. They understand why, they understand kind of the strategy and where the business wants to go right from the forefront, so that they can then kind of influence and be engaged in those conversations to bring enablement as that topic right on the forefront straight away, rather than it almost be becoming, here we go, this is what we've done, now take this and crack on with enablement. For me, it needs to definitely come before that point, so that it becomes ingrained in the business rather than that nice to have. It is then ingrained from the beginning.
And there's stats to back this up. This isn't just your opinion. There's some real clear stats that all are in favor of enablement. And perhaps we can I can put some of those stats out for anyone that's interested. But for anyone that's thinking about this, just go and look at the stats. So you can find them, right? This is backed up evidence as to why it's such an important part of growth of a business.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in the data as well. So it's not just my opinion. Obviously, it's what I believe in. I'm dedicated to enablement, but it is great to see kind of the growth trajectory that enablement has on businesses. So I do think for anyone that's perhaps unsure or a little bit nervous about the enablement discipline, do take a look at that kind of research. And obviously, I'm more than happy to support with any questions anyone has if they are in that position and want to talk to somebody who's kind of gone on that enablement journey already.
Perfect. So then with that, the kind of next question follows nicely with regards to what's the difference in your opinion between, let's say, a good sales enablement manager and an excellent sales enablement manager? You know, what are those key differences?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice question. I think for me, being an excellent sales enablement manager is knowing the people.
Yeah.
So it's not just kind of taking it at one level and generalizing, this is the need, this is the challenge, or whatever it is that you're discussing, but really getting to know those people on an individual basis. Because as we know, everyone is completely different. The way in which they learn, the way in which they consume information, their needs, and kind of their progression.
Isn't it?
It absolutely is. But it's so important to be able to understand those people on a personable level, to be able to take kind of their needs into any situations or conversations you're having with stakeholders in the business as almost proof points, or as ways to say, look, have you thought about this kind of situation? Or person X is really struggling with this, but I know that person Y over here, that's something they're excelling in. Let's connect the two of them. So I think being an excellent sales enablement leader, manager, is knowing the people. And I think being a good enablement manager is kind of the same thing, but more on like that general level. So not necessarily being able to have the time to do that sort of thing, and just doing it more at that general level. But for me, it's knowing the people. And I think the other thing that's really important to me is not being afraid to challenge the status quo. Don't just do what you've always done before because it's what you've always done before and you're happy with that security blanket. For me, if you try something and it doesn't necessarily work, I always say don't see that as a failure. See it as a learning and something that you could then move on from and understand, okay, that doesn't work in that kind of scenario, but now I know that. And I think not being afraid to challenge and ask why as well. Don't just accept yes, and because it's been done before, that it's the best way to move forwards.
Interesting, because obviously I talk to a lot of candidates that are interested in potential opportunities for companies, and a lot of the questions, I never really used to have this question before, but now I get it a lot. What's the onboarding like? Is there some form of, structured new hire academy? What's involved? And I think that the challenge for any leader in enablement is you've got to be able to build that new hire academy and onboarding, but at the same time, it's how do you make it, let's say, effective for everyone? Because does that mean
and
you
sticky,
have
right? Sticky after the actual onboarding.
Yeah, like, oh, I actually have taken what you've said and I've implemented. But you've got so many different levels. So you might have different people in customer success, different people in like direct sales, different people in partnerships. It's tying all that in together, designing something, implementing, making sure it's sticky so it works. And for me, that's obviously that's a skill, right? You got to have experience to be able to put that together, and ultimately lay that out for the company to follow.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think sometimes generalizing now, there's sometimes a tendency to, with onboarding or training, almost think that, okay, I've ticked the box, that's done, we can move on to the next thing now. And it's actually not necessarily the initial training that's the most important. It's kind of retrospectively looking back and having that kind of feedback loop and that always on approach rather than just that initial onboarding. So 6 weeks down the line, there's an activity in place and scheduled that uses the skills that you've learned from that onboarding. You've had some time now to embed yourself into that company. Okay, let's see how you're actually using those techniques and those tools. So I think that's really, really important. And I think making it as interactive and enjoyable as possible. For me, for onboarding, I hate it when it's almost like dictatorial and it's kind of classroom and you're sat there and it's lots of information. Obviously, when you're a new starter, it's a lot of information all at the same time. So for me, it's getting up and trying new things, demoing things, role play scenarios, all of those sorts of things that gets you up and interacting. And then having, like I say, that longevity by the various touch points. And I think if you also connect things like KPIs, incentives, pay plans, all of those sorts of things to that initial onboarding criteria, that gives you the longevity then outside of just the initial kind of 30, 60, 90-day plan.
What about if there's companies out there that are thinking, right, they're at that stage where they're going to start and find a leader in enablement to start that function. So it'd be their first hire, if you like, in that area. What do you think? Well, I suppose it's a two-part question. A, would you look at somebody internally that's done sales, or what would you look for within your first hire in enablement?
So I think for a first hire, it definitely has to be somebody with some experience to come in as that first person in the role in a company.
Yeah.
I think to come in kind of cold is a really hard task, because you have to kind of establish your own knowledge and understanding, as well as trying to establish your position in the company and get the gravitas from the beginning. So for me, it almost has to be somebody that's got that proven record of having done it before, so that they can kind of get that understanding and that appreciation from the offset, because there's nothing worse as coming in as a sales enablement person and somebody saying, well, you've never done this before, like, how do you know? I do this every single day. I think that is important. But I also think that a sales background, going back to your first part of your question, is also really important in one way or another, not necessarily in the specific portfolio that you're going into, but to have that kind of skill set is also really important, because then you've done it in one way or another, so you can empathize, you understand the challenges, you understand what it's like if you haven't hit your quota, and you understand all of those things, so that you can then bring it back into kind of the reality. Otherwise, enablement could have the tendency to become quite academic. And that's not at all what I would suggest that it would be. It has to be someone kind of in the roots of the business.
So basically it's the track record and it's performance measured, right? Performance and management by objectives. But for someone making their first hire, that's what they're looking to assess. You know, what experience have you got? What's your track record? What challenges have you had? And it's that will give that person the confidence that perhaps this is the right first hire. Definitely.
And I think for a first hire as well, it's also important prior to hiring to establish what the business wants from an enablement role, because enablement can cover a very broad spectrum of things. So making sure that it's really clear for that person coming in kind of what the focus areas are for the business, and allowing that person to then shape their enablement strategy off the back of that. Because I think without that, it could become quite kind of grey area and a little bit wishy-washy, trying to do everything. So as a first hire, they may not know exactly what they want the enablement person to do, but they should know what they want the business to achieve, and therefore the two should be able to connect.
So if you've got that crystal clear vision and strategy, then there's no grey or blurry lines when it comes to enablement. Yeah.
Exactly.
Easier said than done, but no, absolutely, I agree with you. And what kind of tools do leaders in enablement? What do they use? What are you using to make sure that this gets done correctly?
Of course. So at the moment, in the current role that I'm in, there's various sales enablement platforms out there. Obviously, I don't want to highlight one above any of the others, because there are so many that are available. So, for example, at the moment, I'm currently using one called Seismic. There are other ones like Allego and MindTickle, for example. But for me, it's really important to have a core enablement platform as such that aggregates all of that kind of content, training, tools into one place, that then becomes that one-stop shop for a salesperson. They are much more likely to use and adopt those systems if it's all in one place. If it becomes quite disparate and bitty in terms of use this for X and this for Y, you'll start to see the adoption going down very, very quickly. You need to get it all in one place. And then from a CRM perspective as well, so for example Salesforce, making sure that that's embedded as kind of business as usual. It's not a nice to have, it's something that has to be done, and this is the way it needs to be done. So from an onboarding perspective, that just becomes the norm. So you're not then trying to get that buy-in to use the tools, it just becomes a way of working.
So sorry to interrupt. So does Salesforce have a module on enablement, or would Seismic or one of those platforms bolt on?
They usually bolt in via like an API integration, so it is easy to do. So for example, a salesperson would use Salesforce as their entirety as the CRM, and from there you would integrate one of the various tools into that platform. So Salesforce becomes your kind of one point of truth that you need for everything.
Which is important. And last question, it's a good question, but what would you say are the biggest myths, or maybe even the biggest challenges you or in general leaders of enablement face, either when they're in the job with their team, you know, or just the general kind of myths that are out there that perhaps we need to clear up?
Yeah, I think it's still the understanding of what sales enablement is, if I'm being completely honest with you. It's still quite new in terms of a discipline in businesses. It's been out there for quite a few years now, but if you look at it on the broad spectrum of kind of roles, standard roles in businesses, it is quite new. So I think not necessarily a myth, but a challenge is making sure that the position of sales enablement and what that role is there to do in that business is extremely clear from the offset, and that everybody is bought in to that role being there. Because I think if you then have to spend lots of time almost selling in sales enablement, you become less effective in what you can do as a sales enablement leader.
Absolutely. So, well, Sheridan, this has been absolutely brilliant. You've opened my eyes in terms of enablement, and hopefully you've done that for the people watching this. So I just wanted to say thank you ever so much. And you know, as excuse me, in the future, it'd be good to kind of jump on another call with you just to kind of see how enablement's changed, right? Because it's evolving, and I think
definitely,
as companies start up, scale up, so kind of looking at their structure, I think we're going to see this more and more, and therefore I think, you know, how people implement it, how people think about it's going to change. So I wanted to say, obviously, thanks ever so much, and it's a pleasure to speak with you.
No, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
Take care, and I hope that fan keeps you nice and cool. Okay.
Me too.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.